But to continue moving everything along, our next and final speaker is Dr. Ed Gordon, who, as many of you know, is a giant in the field of education. I'm going to just read. He's the John M. Musser Professor of Psychology Emeritus at Yale, Richard March Ho Professor Emeritus of Psychology and Education, and the Director of the Institute of Urban and Minority Education at Teachers College, Columbia University, which doesn't do justice. In my mind, this is the embodiment of wisdom. So as our final speaker, please welcome Dr. Ed Gordon.
Thank you very much, and thank you for not going through my 75 years of history there. I'm conflicted on several grounds. One, I'm not even sure I should be here. I don't know a lot about technology. And I'm troubled by our title and by our question. I was told this morning, being confused about the origin of the idea, that it comes out of one of the futuristic TV shows, and I hadn't even been thinking in that frame. But I'm troubled by the topic because it sounds like it is discouraging mindfulness at a time that what we're talking about really is going to require it, even more of it. I like the notion of action. Let's do it. Let's give up on the ideas that, they can't be done. But that kind of commitment to action requires an even deeper commitment to mindfulness, to thinking. Then the question is evidence going to be required as we move into this new world? I can't even conceive of evidence not being required. But what will be required is a different kind of evidence. Now, I said I'm not sure I should have even accepted the invitation. But you'll discover, if you make it to your 9th decade, when you get an invitation to a party, it's hard to say no. My other source of conflict is, it's actually twofold. Sitting here listening to 4 very interesting and stimulating presentations, I have more to say about what I've heard this morning than I have to say about what I have prepared. But if I get too far away from what I've prepared, I won't remember enough of it to share it with you. So maybe I should stick fairly close to it, but in an abstract, and let you get on to lunch or something else. The basic point in my talk, and Eva has a copy in case anybody wants to read the detail, but the basic point is that as we make use of technologies, whether they be pencils or the advanced electronic processes of digital information, as much as they enable us to do things better, more quickly, and more efficiently, they also have the same negative force that knowledge that has produced them has. And that is, knowledge constrains thought, even as it enables it. The more I know, the less I'm likely to question. One of my modern heroes comes out of religion, actually. It's the new Pope. And I was reading about one of his talks, and he said that the more certain he is the more he questions. Now, coming from the Pope, that really surprised me. But think about it. If we know it, if we understand it, if we are sure of it, why think about it? If we've got devices that better enable us to do things, and if we follow this advice and do it, where is the thinking? Obviously, movement in this direction requires deeper thought. It requires human judgment. And what do we humans have as a basis for judgment, other than our experience and the little bit of evidence we can collect? So like Joan, my answer to the question we've been asked to talk about is yes, technologies in the future of K-12 will require evidence. They'll require even more of it. But most important, and that's the essence of what is in my paper, it's going to require a different kind of evidence. We've invested heavily in trying to identify what works. And that's important. And it's good for teachers to know what other people have found that works. But then we made a number of references to medicine. When I choose a doctor, I tend to choose one who's in a teaching institution, because they tend to be better prepared and they tend to keep up with the emerging literature. So they know a great deal about what works. But one of the things I delight in with my internist, Dr. McGregor is his name, his ability to sit down and tell me why it's working, or why it's not working, and what would happen if we tried something else, or if we didn't do something. It reflects an understanding of what's going on, not just a knowledge of what the best treatment is. So the evidence that we need to generate needs to be evidence that explains, evidence that contributes understanding, not simply the knowledge of whether it works or not. In my paper, I refer to a couple of papers by my former colleague at Yale, Bill McGuire. Bill has two very interesting papers. Well, two of his papers were particularly interesting to me. One of them is on contextualism. The other is on perspectivism. And in both of these papers, he's arguing that in the pursuit of answers, in our conduct of research, in our efforts at evaluation, if context is not taken into account, we can mislead ourselves. And even more interesting, he reminds us that what we enter the evaluation or research situation looking for, the perspective that we bring to it, greatly influences what we're going to find. So in our search for evidence, if the only question is, does it work? Not only is that a limited answer, but it may be a wrong answer. It certainly does not contributing to understanding it, and it contributes little to the question that I like to pose to all professionals. If what you know how to do doesn't work, do you know how to go about trying something else, and not, again, just doing it, but an informed trial that comes out of the best of your human judgment. I'm going to share with you just my last paragraph, and I encourage you to ask Eva to let you see what I've written. One of the things I'm most proud of is that the years haven't yet stolen the capacity to think about things. In the paper, I talk about informed practice, and by that I'm referring to whatever we do in education or medicine or social work or engineering. We professionals are supposed to be informed in the actions that we take and the doing that we do. Okay, if guided by inquiry-based practice, informed practice, custom-designed personalization, which many of our advanced technologies now enable, and increasingly personal choice, which these modern handheld devices and epistemic games certainly enable. If we're guided by that kind of activity, evidence will certainly be in great demand. Evidence that is friendly to the user of it, whether it be teacher or learner. I started to say if I were a teacher, but as a teacher, if I were much younger, I'd be concerned about the future of our profession. I think these technologies are increasingly enabling learners to do it for themselves. Our responsibilities will be fewer and fewer, I think, in classrooms unless we get wise enough as a society to put many more of us into classrooms, into the same classroom. I think we've got to be increasingly concerned with the kind of evidence that is available to learners who are going to be making choices about that which they do. Anyway, I predict a greater need for evidence. And I pray for a measurement science. I pray for a testing and assessment enterprise. That is sufficiently capable of the relational analysis of the data to provide the kind of evidence in relational formats, not just yes and no, or it worked or it didn't work, or it worked on this condition, but the evidence of the application of this device or this procedure or this technique in a variety of contexts and by users who bring very different perspectives. The evidence needs to be related to the circumstances that surround it. McGuire would say that also influence it. And in formats, in relational formats that users can understand. The teacher and the learning person needs to be able to understand these data as they relate to situation A and as they could relate to situation B, C, D, or E. I was particularly drawn to one of the papers we heard in the TED Talks. I think it was Dr. Harris who was introducing the concern, I wonder. The evidence I'm looking for needs to respond to my question, I wonder why. I wonder how it works. Thank you.